From the team of the Rockefeller Foundation, Smart Power India, and Power for All, a very warm welcome to all of you. Today's event touches upon a very important but often ignored subject, women in energy access. We have in recent times come about to recognize the multifaceted roles that women play in the energy access dialogue as consumers, as entrepreneurs, and as service providers. We will deliberate on some of these key issues in the next hour and a half, and we do hope that the conversation will make the much needed dent at the right places. Without further ado, may I please request Ms. Deepali Khanna, MD Asia Regional Office, the Rockefeller Foundation, to set the tone for today's event. Over to you, Deepali.
Thank you so much, Vishali, and it is truly an honor to be part of this event today. As Managing Director for Asia, the Rockefeller Foundation, I would like to welcome all the esteemed women leaders whom I admire and respect for the invaluable contributions for what I can well imagine being an exciting discussion today. I believe that the composition of this panel is itself a testament to the fact that the future of social systems is female and women are integral to any discourse on future resilience. Of course, I also want to acknowledge the men on this panel who are also amazing, but I think today is really going to be special with the majority of women on the panel. As we make strides towards SDG 7 to achieve universal energy access by 2030, viewing energy through a gendered lens and how we mainstream gender in planning for energy projects is going to be extremely pivotal. When I started working with the Rockefeller Foundation Smart Power for Rural Development in 2015, I understood the importance of ending energy poverty. What I did not know, and I'm glad I got the opportunity to witness firsthand, is that having energy access was a real game changer for the women we are working with. New business opportunities emerged for women entrepreneurs, the existing business expanded, girls were able to study for longer hours, women's health improved as electricity replaced kerosene for lighting, and overall the village's GDP shot up. Reliable and consistent power has proven to be a change maker in addressing barriers to economic progress for women. In fact, the two go hand in hand. It was inspiring to see how women entrepreneurs could enhance their productivity and revenue by simply switching from a manual sewing machine to an electrical one, or by using electric rice hullers. Their condition as well as position within their own homes and community enhanced significantly. Greater participation of women in the energy value chain can help in more effective access to energy. As women are part of different social networks vis-a-vis men, their inclusion can help businesses reach out to more households. As consumers, women can make more sustainable choices and tend to have a bigger say in household energy decisions, and we have ample facts to substantiate these statements. Including women as key stakeholders in shaping the renewable energy value chain can help in better and more efficient design, production, distribution, and sales of sustainable energy technologies. Our work in India has inspired us to work now across different geographies for ending energy poverty in places such as Myanmar and also Africa, and you'll hear more about that. Within India, it propelled us to launch a new enterprise with Tata Power, TP Renewable Microgrid, with which we will bring electricity to 5 million households and positively impact over 25 million lives. We realize that in this era of unprecedented crisis, including the coronavirus pandemic, we have a responsibility and a remarkable opportunity to harness the power that can lead to a more equitable, safer world for women. We as an organization are investing over $1 billion over the next 3 years to unleash an energy-enabled green enterprise revolution. The Rockefeller Foundation will directly contribute to this goal by securing a new productive rural energy minimum of 300 kilowatts per hour per capita for 1 billion people in energy-poor villages. We hope that this energy will support new small businesses for women, create green jobs, spur education and healthcare for them, and enable them and their families to move permanently out of poverty. We also recently announced the formation of a global coalition aimed at providing sustainable energy for 1 billion people within this decade. Organizations joining this call to action include the African Development Bank, CDC, the UK's Development Finance Institution, European Investment Bank, International Energy Agency, International Renewable Energy Agency, United Nations Development Program, United States International Development Finance Corporation, and a USAID. I'm so delighted that we will hear from Ms. Damiola Ogimbi, CEO of Sustainable Energy for All and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General, Commissioner for the Global Commission to End Energy Poverty, and co-chair of the UN Energy later in the evening today. We're committed to collaborating with global investors, international organizations, and governments, and focus on driving historic public-private investments in infrastructure that accelerates access to clean, safe, and reliable renewable energy across Asia. In this context, our discussions today, comprising of women from diverse institutions, are highly important as we look at issues that are relevant in the journey of making women key decision makers in the future of energy access. These conversations will focus on women's position in the energy value chain, the impact of COVID on access for women, and how women can be economically and socially empowered through energy access. The case studies and experiences that will be shared and discussed today hold important lessons on how equitable access to energy can be ensured. Universal energy access targets are unlikely to be achieved unless energy policies are aligned to women as well as men's energy needs, their assets, skills, limitations and capabilities, and existing gender norms. Lastly, I really would like to thank my incredible colleagues at the Power for All, Smart Power India, and the Rockefeller Foundation team for organizing this webinar. Today's event will advance a conversation on this key area of concern and look at its various aspects so that the world's collective aspirations can be met in an equitable manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepali, for highlighting the much needed conscious recognition of the role that women play in the sector. We will now present 3 relevant perspectives from the ground that will showcase how women with access to reliable energy have enabled socio-economic progress within their communities. Our first presenter of the day is Padma Shri Reema Nanavaty, who heads Self-Employed Women's Association SEWA in India. Reema Ben will be highlighting the impact of electricity on the lives of women in rural Gujarat. Over to you, Reema Ben.
Thank you so much and namaste. Dear Deepali Ben, sisters and brothers in the energy sector, it is indeed a great privilege and honor to be speaking here representing over 1.9 million poor self-employed women workers from the informal economy, the members of SEWA. We were established in 1972 and working relentlessly now for over 5 decades, organizing these informal sector women workers. The SEWA movement has now spreads its wings in the neighboring South Asian countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, and in 18 states in India. And I think we work on a very need-based and demand-driven approach. And on these lines, in 2008, when we were doing an internal energy auditing and budgeting, it showed that the onus of fulfilling the energy needs of a family is largely shouldered by women in the household. As Deepali Ben was saying, that, when there is energy poverty, it pushes the women further into the vicious circle of poverty and indebtedness. And our survey also endorsed that, as we saw that women had to spend over 40% of their time and over 25% of their income in accessing energy for the family needs. Therefore, to address this issue of affordable access to energy, SEWA initiated its energy campaign. We call it Haryali, which means the Green Livelihoods Campaign, in 2008. So through this Haryali campaign, we now have a cadre of women energy entrepreneurs. We have women-owned and managed energy enterprises, which have local decentralized supply chains. It is through this campaign that today women are selling solar lights and solar lanterns, both in the urban and rural areas. Over 1 million solar lights and lanterns have been sold. Each woman, therefore, is earning anywhere between rupees 10,000 to 12,000. Jaideep is here, and I think credit goes to him that he introduced these solar lanterns and solar lights in his former incarnation. Today, it is these women who are, right from Gujarat to Rajasthan to UP to Bihar and all the way to Jammu and Kashmir. We have women who are providing clean cooking solutions to over 30,000 households. We have solar pumps for the salt pan workers in the desert, some 10,000 solar pumps. And we now have solar pumps for farming. And we also have the family farm pumps. The above energy programs not only strengthen the livelihoods of our members, but also create additional employment opportunities for women in the energy sector. Our first initiative was setting up a distribution network for the sale of solar lanterns and fans, and now solar lights, and moving on to rooftop solar lights. I think this led to women themselves innovating. So we have Lalita Ben, who is one of the solar engineers, and she now has her own small little workshop. So together with installing and selling solar lights and solar lanterns, she also helps in electrification of the rural households and linking up, with the rooftop solar so that radios can also be run. Women don't have to migrate to charge their cell phones. So looking at Lalita Ben, now several of such women have come up with their own little workshop kiosks in their villages as well. So I think we also are partnering with NRDC, the National Rural Defense Council in USA, where I think we are also looking at the last mile connectivity. How do you reduce the high power costs of the women working in a very harsh climatic conditions? I would also like to share here the example of Rubina from Kashmir, who lost her father in a political turmoil and therefore had to leave education to support her mother to run the household. When she came to SEWA and saw these women as energy entrepreneurs, she was determined that, she would want to go back and pursue something like this. So on return to Kupwara in Kashmir, she formed a group of women to assemble and sell solar lights. It was not easy for a young girl to form an enterprise. The male members of the village challenged her to repair the light in the mosque, which was not functioning for 2 years. And in a flash, Rubina was able to repair it. The Maulvi, the priest, himself felicitated her, and that was a life-changing incident for her as well as for all the women in her village. I'm saying these examples or case studies. This is how access to energy leads to women's economic empowerment, giving them energy security, giving them work and income security, and that reduces the vulnerability of women. Let me show a small 1-minute video, and then I would end by the last remark. Can we have the video, please?
મારું નામ જમનાબેન હે અને હું મીઠા કામદાર હોઉં. મીઠું અમારા બાપ દાદાનો ધંધો હે. ઈ જ અમારી આવરત અને ઈ જ અમારી રોજગારી. અમે રાત દી મજૂરી કરવી, તડકો સાયો જોયા વગર, તારે મીઠું તમારે અહીંયા પોકે. ઘણા પગ દંતરો ખેંચવાનું થાય ને એટલે લાકડી પગ કરતા ને અમે બધાયના સુવદનો ખ્યાલ રાખી બરાબર પણ અમારો કોણ રાખે તેલમાં શું હોય કે ચાલુ કરતા કરતા આપી જાય રાતથી ધમાડા કાઢે અને પતી જાય તો રણની બહાર લેવા જવું પડે એ તો અમારા હારા નસીબ તે સેવાએ હાથ જાયલો એને અમારી ચિંતા કરી અને એને મદદ કરી તો સેવાના કારણે હું આ સોલર પંપ લઈ આવી આમાં તો કશું નહીં ચા પાડી પાટા ભર્યા કરે સોલર આયા ને પછી મારે મફતનો એક પાટો પાકે અત્યારે મેં 2 સોલર અહીંયા ઉતાર્યા છે મારે ઠામ કોઈ ડીઝલ નહીં એ મફતનો પાટો પાકે એમને 2 સોલર મેકા છે એ ટેસ્ટથી પાટો પકી જાય છે અમારી મૂડીએ વધી અને રણમાં રહેવાની શાંતિ થઈ છે સાચું કહું આ ડીઝલિયો કોઈને ગમતો જ નહીં ખરેખર સાચું હોય તો મારા સોનાનો સૂરજ છે
So as Jamnaben says, the sun has turned into a gold mine for her. And today we have 3,000 such poor women salt pan workers who now have an asset ownership. And we structured a financial architecture where the public sector bank is providing loan and which will be given to 15,000 such women salt pan workers. I'm very grateful to Smart Power India, who helped us design a right kind of a model so that in the off season, as we all know that the salt farming season is for 8 months and the 4 months they go back to the villages, and where we are setting up a micro grid of 2.7 megawatt where the women will be selling the energy to the grid and earning, which will help them repay back the loans. So I would like to pose here a few questions though when I end here. And this is that how can energy programs close the gender gap in employment generation and prosperity sharing? That is still a key that one has to resolve. Why poor working women are still the last to be invited into the energy sector opportunities? How to ensure employment transparency in energy investments? How many poor working women with limited access to energy live or work in locations affected by fragility, conflict, and violence? What energy and employment combined opportunities are available to displaced women in urban and rural areas? If we try to answer these questions in designing the investments as well as in the programs, I'm sure we will not only end energy poverty, but also equip and enable the women in their fight against poverty, which they call it as their economic freedom, the second freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reema Ben, for articulating the enablers and a very important set of questions on the role of reliable electricity in helping rural women navigate their daily lives with a little bit more of ease. Our next presenter is Mr. Richard Harisson, CEO Smart Power Myanmar, who will share insights about the impact of access to reliable electricity in the rural communities of Myanmar. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I verify that you can see my screen okay?
Yes, Richard.
Fantastic. Good evening to everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. And thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the privilege of being able to speak at this event. I'm going to start by just saying that whilst in many countries involving women in programs has been challenging over the years, it's something that needs to be deliberately programmed for and thought through. Here in Myanmar, to be honest, we have found time and time again that involving women in our programs happen quite naturally because women are at the forefront of so much of business, so much of village life, and in fact are engaged at every level of the value chain. So we've had the privilege of being able to work with some extremely strong women leaders of different types at different levels in the energy sector here. As many of you know, Smart Power Myanmar is supported by the Rockefeller Foundation to increase energy access in Myanmar. Many of you have been hearing about Myanmar in the news in the last couple of months for all the wrong reasons, unfortunately. And things are in a very difficult situation over here. But I'm not here to talk about that this evening. I'm here to talk about some of the incredible work that's been happening in energy access and connecting the unconnected in remote parts of the country. I'm going to start by just providing an overview of what it is that we're aiming for and what we've been trying to achieve in order to paint a picture of one woman entrepreneur that we've been focusing on in the south of the country. She is part of a strategy that has been trying to connect as many people as possible in this country. We have 26 million people in the country that don't have reliable access to power, probably a lot more at the moment after the last couple of months of crisis. But in the last couple of years with the Rockefeller Foundation support, we've been able to connect almost 250,000 people to reliable electricity with our partners, which is just over 46,000 connections. And we've also been able to help mobilize about $32 million for support. And I'd like to emphasize that a very large proportion of the people that we've been connecting and the families, obviously women involved at every level. We have a lot of businesses that we've been connecting as well, and about 70% of those businesses are run by women. So women play a very, very strong role in all of this. We use a variety of different tools in order to achieve our energy access goals. And in our toolbox, we have a fund which is focused on providing financing for connections and for productive use. And as I said, 70% of our businesses are run or use women as the main business owners. And that fund is about $575,000. So we've deployed about a half of that in the last 2 years, specifically to connect homes and businesses. We've also developed what we call a bridge financing facility, which is an $18 million facility using local commercial banks to help provide affordable financing for mini-grid companies to enter villages and build new plants around the country. And that's been a very successful and dynamic development for us. We're also in the process of developing what we call a last mile financing facility. And this is specifically geared towards connecting villages to the grid. In Myanmar, you have a very large problem in terms of connecting villages to the end of the grid. I think it's not unique to Myanmar. I think many other countries face this problem. And financing that for villages, the onus is on villages to finance that is a big problem. And oftentimes, it results in money being used that should be going towards the family and agricultural needs. So our facility helps to mitigate for that. We also run one of the country's largest microfinance institutions, and we've been lucky enough to be able to deploy that microfinance institution, 80% of the customers of whom are women, to the problem of last mile connections. And in the last 12 months alone, we've managed to deploy $13 million and provide 31,000 loans. That's about 25,000 of those loans were to women borrowers. We also have a very important team focused on business intelligence and providing technical support. Many of you know Vijay Bhaskar and Sudeshna over from the Melinda team, who are now working with Smart Power Myanmar. To provide technical support to our developers and communities. And we're also developing a comprehensive Myanmar power map, which is designed to provide high quality planning technology for on-grid and off-grid developers alike. So those are the tools that we use. And now I'd like to bring the story right the way down or up, depending on how you look at it, to Dorni. And Dorni is, in my view, a perfect archetype of the type of entrepreneur that Smart Power Myanmar is trying to help to grow from being a limited, constrained, low finance operation to a business that can thrive and can adopt new practices and can expand beyond the borders of its current scope. So Dorni is a resident of an island village called Ye Kantang in the south of Myanmar, in Tanyintari. And this is an area that's very, very famous for fishing. Huge amounts of fish get farmed or caught in this area and shipped to Thailand. But Dorni specializes in cockles, and she has developed a business in exporting cockles to Thailand. And cockles are a very popular dish in Thai salads and eaten all over the country and are very favored. Now, Dorni has been operating a small business for several years, but it was constrained by the fact that she was unable to pump water, she was able to transport effectively, and she only had about 4 hours power a day. So I'm going to come to the impact in a second of what we've been able to do with her, but we've essentially been in a role where we've been able to help facilitate the entry of an off-grid solar hybrid mini-grid to the island to bring 24/7 power and provide really game-changing support for her small business. And here you can see some images of Dorni and the community. So before we were able to work, before we were active with our private sector developer partner, a company called Techno Hill, also run by a female CEO, Dor Barani, who's been a long-standing partner of ours since the beginning of Smart Power Myanmar. They only had 4 hours of power a day, almost no affordable access to capital. They were forced to borrow from loan sharks at about 30% a month. Very low or zero access really to any technical support for how to grow a business. What does financial modeling look like for a micro business on an island in the middle of the Andaman Sea? Almost no support from local authorities or anyone else. And very high labor intensity ratio. In other words, in order to run her business, she had to hire very large numbers of people to do highly menial work that could have otherwise been done by mechanical means powered by electricity. So we've been able to deploy the tools in our toolbox to be able to help her and of course the entire island to access reliable electricity by providing a key financing. Something in the region of $48,000 were borrowed by the developer from our commercial bank partner to build the plant. About $21,000 was borrowed from our energy impact fund at no interest. To be able to connect all the villages on the island and power a few other businesses as well, including carpentry businesses and others. And our applied energy lab and our technical team were able to provide insights and advice to the business to be able to help them to grow. And that has been really key. And the outcome of all of that has been the entire island, which is about 4,000 people, 4,100 people to be exact, about 818 households, 30% of whom live in extreme poverty or were living in extreme poverty, now have 24/7 mostly clean electricity. They do have to turn the generator on from time to time, but it's mostly clean electricity. Energy costs for Dorni's business are down by 60%. Her labor productivity has doubled and her typical order size is up by about half. So although I'll be honest with you, it's been quite difficult getting profit and loss data from this remote island community, but we know for sure that her profits are up by at least 50% in the last 12 months, which is a fairly significant increase. Why has there been such a change? She's been able to move to electric powered pumps to clean her produce. she's been able to transport her produce in different ways and of course reduce costs in other ways. So really an archetypal story of success from a very, very difficult part of the world to reach. So we have a family satisfied, Dorni and her family, and one of her children is now studying in Yangon. Business opportunities were created on the island in the sort of downstream from her business, thanks to this. And the community at large is now in a different place from where they were 12 months ago. They all have power and they're all starting their small businesses. So this is part of a larger story where we see this type of initiative growing and expanding into other islands, but also onto the mainland where we're gaining confidence to be able to provide last mile financing, more sophisticated support at scale, and this goes for the whole country. And this is just part of many of the women, a story as part of the stories of many of the women that we work with. These are 4 of the women that have been really driving some of the work that we've been partnering on, and there are many, many others. But I'd just like to say again, thank you so much for giving us the chance to highlight that she powers electricity, and that's not just window dressing. It's a really live story in Myanmar where people really are making a difference. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. It's a well-documented fact that empowered women lead to an empowered community. Of course, Myanmar has a different context. Women play an important role in generating incomes. So thank you, Richard, for that. Our next presenter, Ms. Leticia Insaidoo, heads sales for PEG Africa and will be sharing her experiences on gender mainstreaming. Over to you, Leticia.
Hi, please confirm you can hear me and if I can have the slides up, please.
Sure. Yes, we can hear you. We'll just have the slides up.
So it's my pleasure to be part of this platform to share PEG Africa's journey in terms of gender mainstreaming into our business activities. So I'd just like to do a brief introduction of PEG Africa, who we are and what we do. Next slide, please. So PEG Africa is a fast-growing company with over 400 plus employees. We provide solar-powered electricity solutions called solar home systems to customers in rural and remote parts of West Africa where the electricity grid do not reach. We offer these solar home systems to these customers on an asset financing basis. So they pay us an initial deposit value between $5 to $20, and then we spread the payments over 21 months to 31 months, depending on the kind that they get. Recently, we've added solar water pumps to our product offerings, targeting small farmers in rural underserved communities. As you can imagine, small off-grid companies like in Africa, such as PEG, must tackle an array of business-related challenges, especially as we scale up the size of our business. And gender equality and women's empowerment are not often prioritized. However, we believe that integrating gender inclusive practices can both benefit business performance as well as increase the social impact. So what was the job to be done as far as gender mainstreaming at PEG was? Next slide, please. We wanted to create employment opportunities for women and to ensure that our solar home systems were reaching female customers in particular. Now, we had to do a bit of context setting. So from January 2018, we began a conversation with employees on gender mainstreaming. Next slide. We started off with a baseline survey, and the objectives for the baseline survey was 1, to increase percentage of women in decision-making roles in PEG, introduce policies and framework to drive gender responsiveness across the entire organization, and then to explore new avenues to acquire female customers, and for me, the point where I'm most interested in female staff, field-based staff. So what are some of the gender inclusive business practices that we did? Next slide, please. we commissioned, and here I'd like to give credit to our technical expert, then Laura Allen, who championed most of these initiatives that I'm about to speak about. The first thing we did, we instituted a mentorship program embedded in the Learning and Development Department to specifically mentor high-performing women in the middle management bands of the organization. Now, we had to do this to ensure that we had talent assurance to back our ambition of getting 15% of women in decision-making roles. From a recruitment perspective, we had an intention setting with decision-making stakeholders, creating the intention around having gender-diverse employee base. Key stakeholders then did intention setting using recruiters, asked for a mixed pool when we were sourcing for CVs to fill particular roles. And for some roles, we preference female hires at certain levels. Secondly, we instituted an equal employer statement, which specifically called out all employment decisions are based on business needs, job requirements, individual qualification, without regard to race, color, religion, or belief, family or parental status, or any other status protected by the laws and regulations in the locations where we operate. For the roles that we open, we actively sought recommendation for strong female candidates from senior female leaders, even outside our industry. And lastly, we reviewed the PEG handbook and internal policies to make sure that we had gender inclusion in all the policies that we had. In fact, we had data that showed that women on the average were working 1/4 more than men before getting promoted in the business. So to address this, we created a form, standardized the process of recommendation for promotions, and streamlining the process across the business. Then we instituted a flexible working hours policy, which we further improved with the pandemic last year. 60%, most of our employees, or all of our employees, particularly those that are based in our headquarters, have the option of working 60% from home and 40% from the office. And if your home situation does not allow you to work from home, then you have the option of also working fully from the office. These options are formalized, all employees are aware, and they make decisions based on these options. Then we had a paternity leave, also included in our policy, a reminder that men are equally responsible in the business of childcare, and this promotes gender equality. Now, what are some of the positive business outcomes so far? Next slide, please. I'm glad to say we had a 14% increase in females in leadership over a 12-month period. 75% of women signing up to the new policies that we instituted, which I just spoke about. And then we've had increased investor interest in PEG. Recently, we've been recognized by Responsibility Investments as one of the best entries for the 2X Finance Initiative Challenge for leadership, employment, and customer. So in summary, this has been PEG Africa's story in promoting the agenda of driving women as a catalyst in the future of energy access. Thank you.
Thank you, Leticia, for highlighting this very important facet, and to all the presenters for your inspiring stories from different spaces. On to our next segment, the panel discussion on women as catalysts in the future of energy access. We are happy to have with us Ms. Carolina Pan, Director for Research, Power for All, who will be moderating the proceedings for us today. The floor is yours, Carolina.
Thank you, Vaishali. Thanks, everybody. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us in this panel discussion on the role of women as catalysts in the future of energy access. My name is Carolina Pan. I'm the Research Director at Power for All, and I'm going to be moderating this panel of inspiring leaders. Joining me are Ms. Suman Sureshbabu. She is the Director of the Economic Development, Power and Climate Team at the Rockefeller Foundation. Mr. Jaideep Mukherjee, he's the CEO of Smart Power India. Ms. Sudeshna Mukherjee, she's a director at Hamara Grid. Ms. Denise Mortimer, she's the Enabling Environment Team Lead and Gender Advisor at Power Africa. Ms. Mariama Kamara, she's the founder and director of Smiling Through Light. And Ms. Aparna Mangla, she's the Regional Manager in India at the Shell Foundation. Welcome, panelists. So some logistics now, we're gonna have about 40, maybe 45 minutes. And what we're gonna do is an initial round of questions for the panelists. And after that, provided there is time, I will take questions from the audience. So if you can please type your questions in the Q&A chat box that you have, and then we're gonna pick some of those questions and make sure those questions are directed to a specific panelist, please. So now without further ado, let's get started. My first question is actually for all of the panelists, and it is, where do women stand and where should they stand in the energy access ladder? So I'm gonna ask you all to answer in maybe a minute, starting with Suman.
Thanks, Carolina, and hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the panel. I just, when you had asked us this question before to think about where women stand on the ladder, and my immediate response was they're not on the ladder right now at all. But then after hearing all the inspiring examples from our previous panelists, I felt like I had to change my answer. I thought that the panelists who spoke just before we got on did an amazing job of showing what is possible when you tackle this issue with intention. And so I stick to my same answer that I don't think women are necessarily on the ladder right now because as a whole, the industry isn't tackling this with intention. They're great examples, but it's not systemic throughout. But there's so much opportunity, as was shown. So happy to dive in more. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Suman. Mr. Jaideep, your thoughts?
Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. So on that subject, I mean, I refer to our observations from rural India, where, we've noticed women play a multifaceted role in the energy value chain. In the rural scenario, women at home, and then they have a role outside home. Most of them are supporting their menfolk in augmenting income, supporting agricultural activities, particularly the post-harvest activities. And what we've observed is the lack of proper electricity access has exacerbated burden on the women folk because they are affected both at home and in their activities outside home. And therefore, whenever we have brought in the electricity access through our mini-grid program, we have noticed how the productivity of women has got enhanced as a result of that, both within their homes as well as outside their homes. And that is extremely important factor. In fact, one of the examples that we often quote, which was one of our early examples, and our partner Melinda, who were building these mini grids in Jharkhand in a rice belt. And one of the standard activities during the post-harvest season was hulling the rice. And a group of women would be engaged throughout the day manually in hulling the rice and producing about 20 kilos of milled rice. And when the electricity through the mini grid was available, and these same women were enabled with the electric rice huller, within 4 to 5 hours, they produced 150 to 200 kilos of rice, leaving not only increasing their productivity 5 to 6 times, but leaving them 4 to 5 hours to indulge in various other activities for both their home and as well as recreational activities. And this is extremely important, along with electricity access, enabling the women with programs to drive their productivity can have tremendous impact both at the household level and the overall economic level in rural India. And as the developing countries are, all aiming to increase their GDPs, and I think this is the part of their policy and program they should keep central in terms of particularly not only electricity access, but enabling the women's productivity by various other programs so that they can really contribute and drive countries' GDPs. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Jaideep, for sharing your experiences, and we're certainly gonna dig deeper into the productive use component. I now want to hear from Ms. Sudeshna.
Greetings from Hamara Grid and Namaste. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel. At Hamara Grid, we have worked extensively in rural Jharkhand and rural West Bengal in India using the mini grid and the pico grid platform over installed energy of 1 megawatt and impacting over 50,000 lives. What we have observed while working very, very closely over a decade with the rural women and the rural population is that, as Reema Ben put forward, rural women are extremely enterprising, rural women are extremely hardworking, but when it comes to the energy access scenario, when it comes to her participation in the energy ecosystem, we see that she's more comfortable, she's more passive, and she is more happy to be a passive recipient of energy services rather than being an active contributor in the energy ecosystem. So as we move up the energy access ladder from basic lighting and mobile solutions to that of powering micro businesses in the rural space, and then to organizing and setting up end-to-end agribusinesses powered by three-phase electricity, which involves, as Richard also put forward, access to last-mile financing, access to markets, access to information, access to mobility and exposure. We see her role, her participation becoming very constrained, it becoming very passive and being limited, courtesy the existing gender norms, which actually glorifies her role as a domestic caregiver. So as Jaideep just now put across, an example from Melinda, wherein, we were a part of Melinda. Hamara Grid was hived off from Melinda. So we actually, that was the, intervention point. We worked very, very closely with the tribal and the rural communities and the women of Jharkhand in India. And now we are also working very closely with Smart Power Myanmar to work with the women entrepreneurs there to make them, transform from being passive recipients of energy services to becoming go-getters and influence the energy ecosystem out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeshna. This is actually a super interesting point that you're raising, how women conceive themselves either as passive or active actors. So if I can hear now, and I want to get back to this later, if I can hear now from Ms. Denise Mortimer.
Sure. Good morning. Good afternoon to all. So I work for Power Africa. So obviously I'm thinking of this question in the African context, and Power Africa also works, we work in rural areas, but we also work in urban areas. So I guess I'm thinking of this question in a slightly different context. And so from where I stand, I see women standing on every rung of the energy access ladder, certainly as customers, but also as policymakers within national governments. We see women, as executives of private sector companies, as managers within electric utilities. We see women employees of generation plants and transmission and distribution systems. So we see women active all over the sector, and then something that many of us have spoken to already this morning is women as energy entrepreneurs in the off-grid sector. So I would agree that there are certainly more women on some rungs of the ladder than on others, but I would say that sort of optimistically, from my perspective, we see women active really in all aspects of the sector. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe they're not where they should be, but they're climbing slowly. Thank you for that. So Ms. Mariama?
Thank you so much, Carolina. Good afternoon, everyone from beautiful Sierra Leone. And we just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about Smiling Through Light as a locally woman-found business with all our agents being female as well. I think this question is really, really important as a young entrepreneur who got into the space over 10 years ago and seeing the changes that's happened and the progress that we have had, but there's still so much work to be done. I think in terms of, and specifically speaking around Sierra Leone's context and our experiences of working here, in the last couple of years, women really, really, with the support of Power for All, worked with the government of Sierra Leone to get the Energy Compact Agreement signed in 2016, opening a really enabling space, an ecosystem for all of us to participate. But I think then what normally happens, women will lead a lot on the policy work. But when it comes to the financing, setting up your own business, getting that support to move forward, to develop the sector more, you then get pushed aside, because the idea is that we are still consumers. For Smiling Through Light, we want to change that. And in Sierra Leone, women are more seen doing more products and distribution. So in the sense of solar lanterns, Pico, cook stoves. But for us, we want to get into service and infrastructure. We want to see women in Sierra Leone leading on huge mini-grid projects. We want them to be taking a stand, because the issue affects all of us and we play a key role in it. But over the years, we failed, we've been left behind. And by 2030, we have 9 years now to get to SDG 7. So there's still loads of work to be done. But I think with support, with events such as these, campaigns like this, we could see women really actively playing a role in the energy ladder.
I agree. Thank you so much. And Ms. Aparna, if I can hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Really glad to be part of this panel. I work for Shell Foundation, which is a UK-based charity, and we work very, very closely with private sector enterprises in access to energy and sustainable mobility. And we have supported many such enterprises who are in this exact sector. And from our experience, we believe that women actually play a very critical role across the whole value chain of energy. Because as energy enterprises scale up in India, they provide rural and low-income women with new opportunities to generate income and achieve greater economic empowerment. We think that the provision of affordable, reliable model energy products and services to women actually provides a huge opportunity to unlock the potential to improve the lives of their families for generations. Just some of the data points which we have seen is that they actually, the women around the world invest almost 90% of their income back into their families and communities, which translate into greater access of nutritious food, education, healthcare, and increased economic activities, which is why, like moving up the ladder for women is just so important. And also the modern energy products provide the women with the opportunity to save almost up to 50% of their income and time and resources. And providing of asset financing to them really leads to high financial inclusion for lower income women. At Shell Foundation, we have entered into many partnerships, and we feel that one such one that I just want to quote here is that we have a large partnership with the UK government, which was deferred earlier, now FCDO. And this program aims at increasing the participation of women across the energy value chain in design, in leadership, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And through this, we have seen several examples of successful enterprises and women acting across the whole value chain. One such example is of S4S Technologies, which provides women farmers with access to solar dryers to dry their own low-grade produce, which then S4S buys back and leading to income generation source for women farmers. I think having given all these positive examples, I also feel that the sector faces a lot of challenges. For example, we have seen that asset financing, especially for women, is very, very hard for productive assets, and which needs obviously more work and more collaboration in the sector. And we've seen that women, even though they're primary customers for energy access products, but they have very low representation across the value chain in decision-making positions or as investors or as entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. So my conclusion from hearing all of your answers is that actually women play many roles. They occupy, different parts of the energy access ladder. However, there still exist barriers preventing them from properly climbing the ladder. So now let's get deeper into those barriers. And I'm gonna ask each of you a different question, starting with Suman. What are the key issues around energy access that are being focused upon at the global level, and how do women feature in these discussions?
Yeah, thanks so much, Carolina. I think when we think about the global level right now, we can't think about it without thinking of it in terms of the COVID pandemic. And frankly, as a lot of data is coming out recently, this has been a total social and economic catastrophe for women in particular globally. I think the UN recently noticed that the poverty rate has increased by 9% for women, and it was supposed to decrease by 2.7% between 2019 and 2021. And this means 47 million more women have been pushed into poverty just because of what we've seen over the last year. And we know these effects are going to be ripple effects over time, and they come on top of what's already a climate for women, which is very challenging. The WHO a few days ago put out a report that said 1 in 3 women globally experienced violence during their lifetime, which was quite shocking. And it was done over a 10-year period. And so, I think taking it into that, that's the kind of lens to sort of start with where we are. But I think what's exciting, and when I made the comment earlier that women aren't really featured in these conversations, not because I don't believe, like my panelists say, that women can be on every rung of the energy ladder and that it's so critical, but being in meetings where we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being invested into energy systems, oftentimes women are not, featured in those conversations, nor are they even represented at the table. And so what does this mean? It means that infrastructure investments like a really powerful social and economic tool for driving gender equity and poverty reduction. But it's only going to be that tool if we have intention behind it and we do things differently, right? By itself, building a mini grid or building a power plant or doing grid extension or, selling solar home systems isn't going to reach the goals, right? All of the examples people have talked about is because there was an intention behind that. And so at the Rockefeller Foundation, we have committed $1 billion to a green and equitable recovery. And as part of that commitment, we have a huge focus on energy access in terms of building back from the economic catastrophe of COVID. And what we're setting is that for our own goals, that all of the work we do in energy access, that 50% of women of DRE value chains should be represented by women, either as employees, engineers, owners, and that for customers and for entrepreneurs, 50% should be women. That's a really high bar for us, and that's what we're sort of putting out there. And I think, so how do you actually make that happen? And so what that means, when I talk about intention and how to do infrastructure differently, I think about it in 3 ways. One is, how do you co-locate infrastructure investments with investments around access to finance, access to livelihood support, entrepreneurship development for women? There's so much investment being made in the livelihood sector, but it's not overlaid with the energy sector, right? So how do you make those connections happening? And then as Leticia was speaking about in the previous panel, I thought that, and I hope I said her name correctly, I might have butchered it, but investments in companies, and Aparna was saying the same thing, as we're investing in companies, how do you ensure that every private sector investment is focusing on gender equity, not just in the outcomes of these projects, but in the makeup of these companies? And then finally, like on the agriculture and energy nexus, which has been spoken about so much, there's so much work that needs to be done on business modeling, on making sure that energy is mainstreamed through agricultural development. But how do you make sure that women are at the forefront of that? And I would say at the foundation, we've been experimenting here and there, but we haven't taken this on in a systemic way, which we're hoping to do now. And I mean, I think that's like, to me at the global level, what's really exciting is really taking infrastructure and thinking of it as a completely different approach. It's not just about building things, but it's about really using it to drive poverty reduction, to drive gender equity, and to reach all of these goals that we care about as a global community and that countries particularly are struggling with right now. So, you know, I think just to give a little more clarity to my women not being on the energy ladder statement from before, I believe they're everywhere on the ladder, but I just don't think that as a global infrastructure community, we're at all taking this issue seriously. But I think that can change with all the efforts of everyone on this panel and others out there doing this work. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Suman, and this is actually wonderful. And thank you for also sharing what foundations can do to actually help in this gender equity gap. And this is great, and I'm happy that's happening. It is ambitious, but you'll get there. And now let me ask Mr. Jaideep, how can women play a role in the on-ground execution of services for the last mile? And how important is it for them to be part of the service industry?
Yeah, thanks, Carolina, for the question. You know, I mean, for the last 5 years, working in the energy service sector at Smart Power India, one of the things we observed was this whole electricity distribution work was a completely male-dominated space. One of the things which most people will be aware that India now has the whole grid electricity system now spreading to every village. But one of the greatest challenges of India's electricity distribution system is that the last mile delivery of electricity is extremely unreliable, and therefore the utilities, which are largely government owned, are perpetually, one of the things, they're perpetually running at losses, and at the same time the services that they're delivering in the rural is poor. And one of their complaints is they're not able to do so because they are only able to collect 40 or 50% of the electricity that they supply, and customers are not paying for the electricity. While our experience from 3 to 5 years of mini grid work was that all the rural electricity customers of taking the mini grid services were paying their bills on time, they were paying their bills in full, and there was no challenge with that. And we understood where the gaps were, and therefore in Orissa, we wanted to demonstrate to the utility there that this whole situation can be transformed on the ground, and therefore, and they agreed to constitute a joint project which we called the Model Distribution Zone. And the challenge we wanted to address there was how to improve the billing, the collection, service, and reliability at the last mile. And at the center of this program, we took a bold initiative of engaging women from the local self-help groups to act as the bridge between the utility and the customers. And they were, we received a huge response to this initiative from the women self-help groups. And and from there, 160 women were selected, and they were called the Bijuli Didis, basically, which translates into power sisters. So these power sisters, or the Bijuli Didis, were deployed as the interface between the utility and their customers, with a promise taken from the utility that they will start improving their services to the customers, because we would be able to improve the billing, collection, and services to these customers, and it will become a win-win cycle instead of a lose-lose proposition, which it has been. Poor supply, low payment, and therefore losses and more losses. I mean, and this was a very novel experiment. For the first time, women were being deployed in this role. over a 12-month period, the results were absolutely staggering. And one of the things that we observed was the women were empathizing better with the customers, understanding their challenges, and working to address their customer grievances with the utilities. On the other hand, they were trained to employ technology to deliver instantly the bill and make the people aware of the value of paying the bill on time. And then the customers started recognizing that as the services were increasing, as the grievances were being addressed, they started paying the bill on time. Not only that, many small enterprises and households which had not connected to the supply due to various grievances also started connecting to the utility supply. But just to look at the end of the 12 months, the results were simply staggering. The utility collected $1 million extra in the period of 1 year against a cost of just $100,000 spent on this program. The losses came down by 7%. The per capita consumption in the household level went up by 20%. About $1.5 million worth of diesel and kerosene cost was saved by the various enterprises and the households who were using substitute power by the alternate methods due to unreliable electricity. And these women started earning about $100 extra in income, besides whatever else that they were doing as a part of their self-help group. And this this example has led to now in Orissa, across Orissa, the utilities deciding to engage women's self-help group in the last mile services of electricity and address this basic problem, which was a doom loop converting to the virtuous cycle of reliable supply, all customers paying for their electricity, and in the process, women also engaging the communities better, creating income, livelihood. And not only that, this whole experiment project was taking place while COVID was underway. During that period, despite various disruptions, just when the lockdown ended, the same Bijli Didis or the power sisters were at the forefront of educating their customers about health, hygiene, safety, delivering masks, along with the whole billing and collection activity. So this was a tremendous success story, which we are now taking across the state. But what it demonstrates is that, the potential of women from within the community to solve this most challenging problem that India has at the last mile of, reliable supply plus metering, billing, collection, and educating the customers to pay their bill on time and resolving their grievances with the utility. So I think this is a success story that we want to progressively demonstrate and engage more women from the communities to address this most chronic problem of that India has of last mile service. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaideep. This is fascinating what you're sharing, and I definitely want to learn more and research more about this specific project. So, Ms. Sudeshna, somewhat related to this, from your experience of providing electricity to rural communities, can you share instances of what women can and should expect in terms of opportunities and socioeconomic growth?
Thanks, Carolina. And this is something which is very close to my heart and something that we really believe in, Hamara Grid, and this is what we are working for. So we all realize and understand that the 17 SDGs cannot be achieved without integration of gender concerns, gender planning, and gender equity. At Hamara Grid, as I shared before, we have installed and commissioned 1 megawatt of mini grids and pico grids put together. But for us, this clean energy access platform is not an end itself, it is a means to an end. By that, I mean it is not only about providing clean, reliable, and affordable electricity to the rural villagers, to the rural consumers, but it is also about engaging with the rural consumers, rural women, rural communities to impact their lives and livelihoods. Basically, it is to Hamara Grid, this is all about SDG 7 impacting SDG 8, which essentially means that access to modern, reliable, affordable, and clean energy paves the way for sustainable development and inclusive development of the local communities. So with this kind of a operational experience behind us, we have now spread our wings from India to Myanmar, and we are working very, very closely with Smart Power Myanmar, with the mini-grid developers community there, with the local villagers to improve the development outcomes at the grassroots level. So in India, with help of Smart Power India, we have been able to incubate over 60 to 65 rural women entrepreneurs in tribal and rural Jharkhand across different vocations spanning rice hulling, milling, poultry farming, metal fabrication units, irrigation, so on and so forth. So what has been our main takeaways? In this platform, I would like to highlight our main lessons learned, our main takeaways to take this model of DRE-driven women entrepreneurship models and take it to scale. So one of the first and foremost which comes to my mind is choice of the right technology. By right technology, I mean technology, machines which are simple to use, the ergonomics and the design of those machines, the electric motors, should be such that it is gender friendly and encourages rural women to come forward and use them. The other two factors which can really take the model to scale and very oft spoken in the different webinars and forums is that of access to last mile financing, extremely key, access to cheap capital for the women entrepreneurs, as well as access to market information and access to markets, extremely key for the model to go to scale. Last but not the least, as part of the access factors, it is very important to mention access to skill building and capacity building. By skill building, I do not mean it's a homogeneous package. It can be segregated into different dimensions. One, training and building the capacities of the rural woman entrepreneur on how to use electric machines, electric motors. Second, how to organize her business, her finances. And third, very key, to train her and capacitate her how to engage with local stakeholders for better business outcomes. But as it is true for a rural electrification model, that it goes beyond access to impact lives and livelihoods in a sustainable manner, the same is true for the DRE-driven woman entrepreneurship model. It goes beyond these four access factors: access to markets, access to finance, access to technology, and access to skill building, and also invites consideration of some strategic factors that really help this model to reach scale. First and foremost, I would like to point out is active policy intervention. By this, I mean an active collaboration between the private and the public partners to anchor the entire process and work across the energy access value chain to create impact on the ground. And we should all understand, and through our operational experiences at the grassroots and through us being practitioners at the grassroots level, we have realized that there is a cost for this development. And as accountable and responsible stakeholders, we should budgetize this cost and bear this cost for long-term impact. The second strategic factor is that of creating and strengthening local champions of change. I've worked very closely with rural women and rural women entrepreneurs in Jharkhand and West Bengal, and I have seen how successful women entrepreneurs at the local levels can inspire other rural women to come forward and participate in this process. Believe me, this I say with conviction, they are really the champions of change and helps this model to grow from within. Third, it's very important to populate a certain geography with a large number of women entrepreneurs. This gives visibility, this gives strength in numbers and helps the model again to reach scale and attracts quite a bit of investment, capital, infrastructure, HR for this model to grow. And last but not the least, it's very important to measure impact. Impact becomes evidences to inform policy decisions and towards better integrated gender planning with gender equity and gender concerns. In conclusion, I would like to kind of point out that for designing and executing any DRE-powered women entrepreneurship models in the rural space, it is imperative for us as responsible stakeholders to understand the constraints, the capacities, the challenges of the proposed solutions and act upon them. This calls upon us to act in a very, very collaborative and coherent manner, and inviting the private actors, the public institutions, media, academia. It involves the local women, the local communities to participate in this process to fast track the mandate. I end by saying that the mantra of Hamara Grid is that we can only scale upwards by scaling down. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sudeshna, for sharing these valuable learnings. And Ms. Denise, I wanted to ask you, based on your work with Power Africa, how can we engage the private sector on issues around gender mainstreaming in the energy sector?
Thanks for the question. Well, so as some of you may know, Power Africa is a US government partnership that's aimed at doubling access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we define ourselves as a partnership because we're referring to ourselves as partners of African governments and development partners, but also we have a lot of private sector partners. Power Africa currently has more than 150 private sector partners that represent a diversity of actors across the energy sector, so investors, developers, on-grid, off-grid. So, a really diverse set of partners. And so we have quite a bit of experience working with the private sector. So speaking to this experience, I would note that sort of early on, probably 5 years ago or so, we found ourselves struggling a little bit to find partners that were eager to work with us on issues of advancing gender equality in the energy sector. But I think that the way we made ourselves heard was to try to speak their language. The way we made ourselves relevant to our private sector partners was to really highlight the business case for gender equality. At that time, a lot of the data that we were leaning on was generated outside of the energy sector, but we found it compelling enough, and we thought that our partners would find it compelling as well, and that they would sort of experiment with us in this space based on the positive results in other sectors. So luckily we found a few partners who were willing to explore the business case hypothesis with us. And we had some early, very, very encouraging success. So the example, the case study that we heard earlier, Leticia's case study from PEG Africa, is a great one. So Power Africa worked hand in hand with PEG in advancing all of that great work that Leticia described in her presentation. So a number of off-grid companies, both in East and West Africa, then followed PEG's leadership with Power Africa's support. So some of those companies were Baobab Plus, Delight, Ignite, EcoPower, Easy Solar. So a number of different companies then expressed interest in working with us based on that early success with PEG. So what did we actually do? What did working with the private sector look like? We tried to tailor our support to our companies on gender inclusion in different ways, depending on their priorities, depending on what they were looking for. So a lot of the companies received the kind of support similar to what was described by Leticia with PEG. So we undertook a baseline assessment with them, and then developed a gender action plan, and then shared key resources and tools to implement good practices. Others sort of took slightly different approaches. So for example, a Tanzania-based off-grid company is interested in understanding productive energy technology needs of women farmers in order to better serve that segment of the market, right, and potentially increase their sales. So Power Africa is working with them to undertake field research to collect or glean qualitative data, which will inform then the development of a gender-focused market strategy for that company. We hope, or our expectation is that then that gender-focused market strategy will become a template that others could adapt and adopt, depending on the markets that they're looking at. We have also supported some private sector companies in really measuring and documenting the impact of their products and services on women in the communities that they serve. So we have a really great example from Black Star Energy in Ghana. So Black Star Energy surveyed community members with a tool that, again, was developed with support from Power Africa. And they found that when women gained access to energy from a Black Star provided mini grid, the women in the community increased their incomes 11-fold, not 11%, but 11 times over in just 1 year. So we see, that kind of like exponential increase in productivity is really powerful. And then I would say most recently, Power Africa is now engaging with a number of private sector investors, offering technical support to apply a gender lens to their investments within the energy sector. So for example, Power Africa supported its partner Responsibility Investments to develop a gender lens investing roadmap for one of its clean energy funds. And along with that, they're also developing tools then to apply that gender lens through each stage of the investment process. And so the responsibility is just one example. Other private sector investors are also receiving this kind of support from Power Africa.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise, for sharing your experiences in Power Africa. So I just want to acknowledge that Jamilola has joined us and we're running a bit over time. So I have my two final questions for Mariama and Aparna. So if we can try to answer them in maybe 2 minutes each. So for Mariama, I wanted to ask you, what have your experiences been as an entrepreneur when it comes to accessing reliable electricity?
Thanks, Caroline. I think for like productive uses over the last couple of years has been a typical buzzword within the development sector. But we have seen changes from how it was thought of for more traditional use to now where you see household benefits, you see productive uses in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of agriculture. From our experience in Sierra Leone, where with a population of 7 million people, only 26% have access to electricity. And in rural communities, it's less than 6%. So for us, this is an urgent need. And there needs to be really good policy and environment where we have an ecosystem where different productive uses take place. For example, Sierra Leone's GDP, about 60% on agriculture. We're not seeing a lot of work being done in the country around supporting farmers, small home farmers, because I think the policy is not really clear in terms of where direction's going. Now, a lot of the work being done in Sierra Leone is focusing on mini grids, which normally comes from your funder and what they want to be seeing being done in the sector. But we know the key benefits of it. So for example, a lot of our customers who buy our solar product, we've seen an increase for businesses in terms of some of the women who have got tailoring shops. They're using it, they can trade for longer, they can trade for hours, making much more income. We've seen use in education through our One Child, One Land campaign, where you support young children in off-grid communities with a solar product, seeing an increase of 3 to 4 hours of study time, seeing an increase in their grades, seeing an increase in safety and concern. So as an entrepreneur, I understand, and we do see what needs to be done. We do understand how productive use does work, but there needs to be much more strengthening of that system within the country, of how, if there's a focus on, for example, PAYGO, and how we use technology, how does that match to support someone who's doing some mini-grid works? How, if someone's working on a mini-grid site, can you support a local business who can then sell pico solar lanterns, which we know rural communities are able to afford, and there's a market for them to do that. So as my experience, yes, it's been quite positive, but there still needs to be much more work done. I think it needs to be much more organized, with all the development partners, agencies, the funders, actually speaking with our ministry, we have an organization here called Rehearsal, which is the Renewable Energy Association of Sierra Leone, which is made up of all the key players within the sector, having discussions with individuals in the sector, instead of it being much more a top-down approach, because top-down is not really working within the country. It needs to be much more collaborative to see how we address some of the different issues discussed.
Thank you so much. And before we move to the keynote address, Ms. Aparna, in your experience, does the investor community consciously look at gender equity while financing energy projects?
Yeah, I'll try to be shorter than 2 minutes. I'll try my best. So I feel that as much as the investors would like to be equitable, but majority of them actually are not looking at it very actively. While there is a growing interest from impact investors to support women across sectors, example, energy, health, financial inclusion, there are several issues which prevent investments into gender inclusive enterprises. As an example, there is limited data as to what extent a gender inclusive approach in a business is leading to better business performance and impact in emerging markets. There is a lack of understanding on how to evaluate businesses that are gender inclusive, and investors find it challenging to integrate a gender lens in their investments, apart from looking at funding women founders. We at SF are trying to create a framework for the sector to help the investors understand how to measure and improve their gender inclusion across investments and portfolio. And just one of the other challenges is the lack of visibility and access of enterprises that are delivering business results. So just from the pipeline perspective, basically, it's hard for the investors to gain access to the enterprises which are delivering business results as well as positive impact on women and girls. The investors say that generation of pipeline is the biggest challenges that they face, but it's very, very challenging to change their pipeline sourcing or to understand new ways of developing pipeline. We at SF are also trying to partner with intermediaries to help develop a pipeline of women entrepreneurs in India and Africa. Historically, I think the main impact metrics for energy investments have not focused on gender, but instead have prioritized things like number of electricity connections or carbon reduction. But this is starting to change now with the advent of the 2X challenge, for which all DFIs are prioritizing funds and enterprises which can prove impact on women as business leaders, consumers, employees, investors, entrepreneurs. And as gender finance accelerates, we are seeing more products and strategies that merge gender impact metrics with environmental metrics. So we would expect to see this rippling out in the investment communities over time now.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, panelists, for sharing your insights and experiences. This has been great. And now we have Ms. Damilola Ogumbiki. She's the CEO of SE for All, and she will deliver a keynote address.
Thank you, everybody, for having me here. I thought I was giving closing remarks, so I hope it's not too short for a keynote address. First, I want to thank Rockefeller Foundation, Smart Power India, who are amazing, and they're always involved in all my different events, Power for All, and for just allowing me to contribute for this very, very important conversation. Many of you who know my history knows that I was the head of an agency in Nigeria at the age of 27. So it's not just important to give women the opportunity, it's also important to give young women the opportunity to actually strive in sustainable energy. So to simply put it, without empowering women, we cannot achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7, and we cannot ensure affordable and clean energy for all by 2030. I believe very strongly with it, and I think the data also supports it. Women across the world are driving force on clean energy transition, and it's not just about a climate conversation, it's about how to empower women and how to make sure women get to a state of economic growth that they can support themselves, and we're not going back and forth with some of these subsidy regimes. from young entrepreneurs to female CEOs like myself. We need to harness ambition, and we shouldn't get, just as women, to certain positions and forget the other women that we also have to mentor to make sure that they get to our positions or they exceed it. I think it's really important to focus on the fact that, unfortunately, with this pandemic, it's very clear to see that the lack of access to electrification and clean cooking disproportionately affects women and children as we move forward. And we need to come up with a sector with role models and champions and female-friendly policies in government. It's important that we demand that when you are doing a results-based financing project or you're doing a large procurement, there's a certain amount of people that actually have to be female that work in the workforce. Again, in my previous role, I was really fortunate to train about 600 young women who are doing amazing things around the world now, but that's because I insisted on it in my role that it has to be women leadership in some of these areas. And I think that is sometimes a challenge of the fact that a lot of us do not want to challenge institutions as they come forward, or they don't want to challenge processes. And I think as women and corporations and just responsible people, we have to do that. We already see the facts that as Denise from Power Africa said, is just, how much opportunity when you give a woman sustainable energy. We need to be part of the solution, not just a recipient of that. I think in spite of the challenging year we've had, this is a really fantastic year to kind of accelerate energy access and gender equality, to really recover better from the pandemic, and to make sure investments in energy also translate in investments in women in energy, as we move to what exactly an equitable, just transition really looks like. It is also important to ensure that women are also at the forefront of all these efforts and pushing participation. Like I said, there are still a vast amount of inequalities, both in the global north and the global south, in terms of the approaches of women, in terms of energy careers, and how women are seen on a lot of these bigger platforms. And even when you get to my role at the UN, insisting that sometimes I'm not going to be on podiums, on platforms, unless there's at least one other woman there, and preferably also some diversity as well. Diversity is key. And I know we haven't spoken about it now, but it's also to make sure that there's equal representation from the global north and the global south. It is extremely frustrating for people, someone like myself, who does not see anyone who looks like me on screen, Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call. And we really need to have African and Asian leaders demanding a spot in the conversation. And that's why I'm really happy at SE4 we have really taken this on, and we have made sure, at least under my leadership, that we hire young women from Africa, from Asia, mostly Indian, who have done a fantastic job heading actual teams instead of just being part of the conversation. In terms of inequalities, I mean, I don't have to tell you the facts. I mean, the data is clear that if you give women access to energy, they basically do a lot more with it than the man. But it's important that when we talk about access to energy, we talk about energy for development. And I was really happy to hear when we started talking about productive use. I mean, we need to shy away from the narrative of giving people light. That's good and it helps, but that isn't enough to get people out of economic growth. And like I said, I used to be on the field for many years, and a lot of women will come to me and say, can you give me power where I work, or at my farm where I am for 16 hours a day, instead of where I live? I can sort out where I live. So it's important that we focus on the data and understand that these women know what they're saying, and this is what will make sense. It's also important that we get accurate data on willingness to pay and ability to pay, so we truly don't leave anyone behind, and we're providing solutions that don't only benefit people today, it benefits for the next amount of years. I cannot underestimate the need for mentorship. I mean, I've been really, really lucky in my lifetime, and internships as well. We have a really great internship program at SE4. Every organization can have an internship program. I had one, it completely changed my life and my overview, and even my idea of getting into the energy space is because I had internships. And the more of those things we make available, summer internships, Easter internships, things for young people and young women to really come together, it's really, really important. And finally, I think it was touched on in terms of the lack of finance for female-led companies and organizations in the space. I believe it's something between 2 to 10% or 11% of what is actually funded specifically for gender. That's not good enough, and that can't continue, especially the results showing that gender and women-led organizations are doing a lot better. And it's something in my career that I'm constantly challenging, and I will never stop. Again, like I said, we need to recognize that this year particularly seems like the year for women's empowerment. It seems that people are actually sitting up and discussing these things, and you don't feel like a lone person in the conversation. And, you know, again, thanks to Smart Power Africa for having this type of conversation. But the conversation now has to turn into action. And we as women are responsible for tracking how we grow and holding ourselves accountable and other women in these different forums. I'd want to challenge us to all be bold and be ambitious. We're working with Rockefeller Foundation on our Be Bold campaign, which is a nice background you have behind me, just in terms of this is the year we raise ambition and we insist things have to be done. I'm always available if anybody wants to discuss this any further. This is a topic, if anybody knows me, that's really passionate to me, but we need to get governments, businesses, development partners, financial institutions to really realize that this issue that we're talking about, sustainable energy, is not nice to have. It is the difference between life and death for a lot of people, and especially women. So thank you so much for having me today, and great to be part of the conversation.
We're very grateful to you, Damilola, for your address talking about how women are driving forces of the clean energy transition and the importance of empowering women for more representation as well as better opportunities, especially from a younger age like yourself. Thank you, panelists, for joining in on this important conversation and sharing your insights. I think all of us can take home that we are a little bit better informed, and hopefully this conversation will carry on and the dialogue will carry on. Thank you again, panelists. Thank you, audience, for being such a lovely audience. I'm sorry we could not take the questions because we are a little bit over time, but we will come back to you for sure. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.